Oi, oi, it's your boy, the Nikita Krylov of slagging this card of, Jack Slack. It's the Jack Slack podcast. We're coming at you on Monday, the 24th of October, and we're talking about UFC 280. How are we going to do this? I'm going to lead with a quick disclaimer for the guys who had good fights and good performances. Islam Makhachev is the real deal. Good job. Really like what I saw from him. Charles Oliveira, not the best performance in the world from him, but game, which is something we're going to get into later on some of the other competitors on this card. O'Malley and Yan had a terrific fight. No matter how butthurt you are about the result, it was a great fight. And Dariush and Gamrot actually delivered, which was phenomenal. Really good fight. Every single other fight on this card was arse. Just terrible. And it wasn't like they booked bad fighters. It just devolved into really bad fights. We'll slag them all off individually, but man, the overwhelming feeling because basically 3 of the last 4 fights were the good ones. It was just a long evening of really bad entertainment and a lot of bad sort of. Some of the fights were pretty bloody sloppy too. You really noticed it when they had the Contender Series guys on, like Armin Petrosian versus what was that guy's name? AJ Dobson. But also, even in things like Bilal Muhammad versus Sean Brady, I'm sure lots of people are going to be like, that was a clinic, but it was literally just 2 guys throwing 1-2s. And then one guy got tired from hitting the other guy with 1-2s, so the guy who wasn't tired threw more 1-2s and won. But yeah, we'll get into all of that in a minute. Just the whole thing was gaudy as shit. Really crazy week because the UFC have announced that they're going to be doing Power Slap, the slap contest, which is just people open-handed haymakering each other in the head and not avoiding it. I think it was Dan Hooker said this, but the UFC was funding studies on brain trauma from fighting. Like, how do you do that and then do this? It's such a weird, just dropping of all pretense. And this event was in Abu Dhabi. Obviously, they get paid to sports wash for Abu Dhabi, or for the UAE rather. And honestly, I was looking at the fight week stuff. I've only been to a couple of events as press, boxing, kickboxing, MMA altogether. But I very quickly got bored of it. The press conferences and the people you have to be around. This was like that on liver. I was going to say steroids, but Liver King was there. Hasbullah, who's still finding that hilarious. Steve Harvey in the front row. It was just like all the worst people you'd never want to be around in one room. And the whole thing felt tacky and cheap, which was really interesting because so many people, like, their excuse for the UFC getting 80% of the revenue split is, well, a lot goes into hiring a camera crew and pointing lights at the ring. And really, if you watch a Cage Warriors event, the production values aren't that different. Or the only difference is that the UFC has advertising all over everything and reads you ads every 10 seconds. But that was just the vibe of the event. The vibe was fucked. But anyway, let's do something good. Let's start with something good. Islam Makhachev versus Charles Oliveira. Good fight. Great finish. Islam doing what Islam does. Charles Oliveira doing some interesting things, but ultimately coming up short. It was it was the hands of Islam Makhachev that surprised Oliveira in this fight. Let's go from the top. So from the very early going, Charles runs out with a flying knee, because of course he does. But that was sort of like the only real showing of that Charles Oliveira recklessness, aside from the last flying knee where he sort of just jumped in and got chinned. A lot of this fight was Charles not kicking the body, not doing the stuff that he normally does that wears on people so much. He got very much into headhunting on the feet, which is, we've said his punching power has really improved over the years. His punching mechanics are very good. But we were talking about this on the podcast, but what a lot of what he does is he drives a high pace and he hits the body. And those things really do wilt people at the highest levels better than anything else. If you are just headhunting, guys firstly can take the punches, can take the blows to the head, but it doesn't tire people in the same way, even if you are hitting them. So they came in for a quick trade of hands, and Charles sort of stumbled and fell in to try and attempt a takedown. He got double underhooks, but he was falling onto his side as he did it. So he ended up in the bottom half guard, kicked through all the way to closed guard. That I thought was going to be interesting because, no one really has a good closed guard in MMA for attacking. And, very few people get up from there like Charles Oliveira as well. Or rather, very few people create scrambles in the way that Charles Oliveira does. Went for an armbar, looked to be threatening it, came back on the triangle choke attempt as the elbow slipped away. The same combination he used on Hioki a dozen times. He uses it all the time. He digs under the leg with one arm, throws his hips up for an armbar, and as the opponent pulls their elbow in to protect their arm, he jumps over the elbow and snatches the triangle, or threatens the triangle, because he's very rarely going to get it. Makhachev kept his posture, looked good. I think one of the interesting things in that first round is that, we talked about this before, but what Islam Makhachev and Khabib are so good at, and Usman also, and a lot of top-level wrestlers in MMA nowadays, what they're so good at is, or what they're most used to, is punishing the wall walk. Because guys open their guard, scoot their butt to the fence and start using the wall to climb up. I'm going to say it again, I say it every podcast, but the wall walk's so powerful. Guys get up against Islam Makhachev and Khabib Nurmagomedov and Usman. Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier got up against Khabib Nurmagomedov. You'd consider them much worse wrestlers and grapplers, but having your back to the wall is very powerful. You'll get up eventually. It's just that it eats up a whole round where you're getting hit in the head, and then when you get up, you're still there along the fence, and they've got their arms locked around you. So it does have its utility, but I think, as we've always said with the Khabib problem and then Islam and Usman from that, Kamaru Usman, not Usman Nurmagomedov, there's a case to be made for turning yourself off the wall and trying more, trying to scramble up out in the open more, using your guard to attack, or just putting your feet in the chest and hoofing them and trying to scramble up from there. Because they're so good at, the thing about the wall is that you are pressing yourself into it and you're giving yourself that rigid surface to build up against, but you are also holding yourself in place in a static position while they just trap wrists, fold you down, punch you in the head. So one of the really interesting things, this fight hits the mat in the first 30, 40 seconds, closed guard from shortly after that. And then you'll notice that Islam follows Charles's hips very well with his own hips. So his knees are either side of Charles's hips, and he keeps walking around him, pushing into him, landing short shots that aren't really, not really damage shots. Like if Charles was opening up and sitting along the fence and getting folded down on his arms, he'd have problems. If he was in half guard, he'd have problems, or a flattened half guard, or something like that, or maybe knee shield. But here he's not really landing with any force. He's not landing any elbows. Charles has got an elbow inside on his own head a lot of the time, and then he's bringing his own elbow down inside on Makhachev to try and cut him. But what you'll notice is that in the 3 minutes or so that the fight's on the mat in closed guard, they work their way around so that Oliveira is back in the center of the cage, which is completely the opposite of what happens when most people get taken down. If you watch Khabib versus Dustin, well, firstly, Dustin walks himself right back to the fence and gets taken down almost immediately. But later on, Dustin gets taken down into the open. I think he's pulled off the fence and thrown down in the open. And he opens his guard, puts his hands on the mat, sits up and pushes himself back into the fence. And you'll see guys like Masvidal do that. You'll see a lot of ATT guys do that. It's quite a common just go-to now. People go, fuck it, no guard, we're going to the fence, I'm getting up. And I think it's a very valid strategy because, time is the most important thing in MMA. And time on the bottom is not rewarded. But it was very interesting watching this. Charles keeping himself away from the fence and Islam not really pushing him to the fence until I think it was the second round when he takes him down along the fence, basically. And it's a lot easier to get him there. But Charles opens his guard to start kicking Islam away out in the open. Islam steps over into half guard and it really smashes into him. If you watch, we talked about the pressure before, but if you watch either him or Khabib, when they're pushing in along the fence or when they're pushing in on half guard with an underhook, their chest is just smushed into the opponent. They're leading with their chest. The underhook's they're not clinging to the underhook's just there, and then they're smushing their chest into the person. And he starts doing that, and that's a bad position to be in. That's how he easily passed Bobby Green, Drew Dober, basically everyone he's fought. Underhook half guard, or underhook in half guard, smash over the top knee. And what you saw was Charles, without the underhook, still elevated him, used his momentum of pushing in to get under the legs and elevate him into a deep half guard, which was really interesting. And he created a scramble and came up on a back body lock, which is a really cool move. But also, not only getting out from under him, but getting out into a good position. Yeah, really nice. Just really good jiu-jitsu. It reminded me a lot of what Fabricio Verdum used to do. One of the very few guys using deep half guard well in MMA. Deep half guard's a weird one because it's kind of like X guard. People consider it like a guard. They look at their position and they go, well, that'll never work in MMA because the other guy will just stand there and punch down on you. And you're going, well, if he's standing there, you're not doing it right. He's got to be posting hands to the floor. You've got to be moving him backwards and forwards. It's not a guard because you're not holding it. It's a sweeping position, and you're just moving until you get the sweep. And if you watch good people, that's how that works. And you'll occasionally see guys get really good grapplers get gassed in bottom position, and they'll go to the deep half guard. Hani Yahya versus Enrique Barzola is a great example of that. I wrote a little piece about it on the Patreon a while ago. Go search, Yahya on the Patreon page. But Mackenzie Dern did it against Yan Jianan as well. She got tired. She was on the bottom, and she pulled into deep half guard with her head between Yan's legs. And this is what Rani Yahya did to Enrique Barzola too. And then they popped his head out the back. Or she popped her head out the back door and put it behind Yan's butt, and then just held around her waist. So she wasn't sweeping really effectively, but she had put her head in a nice safe position, and Yan wasn't in really a position to hit with any venom or do much without risking her coming up. But yeah, Verdum, he used to not have the underhook and still pull into deep half guard, because they always say, one of the rules of going into deep half guard is you need the near side underhook. Whichever leg you got trapped in your half guard, you want that underhook. So when Makhachev is passing half guard, he gets the underhook on that side, so you can't have the underhook. And Oliveira was able to enter the deep half guard without it. And one of the ways that Verdum used to do it was that because if you go underneath someone in a deep half guard, or try to, with them having the underhook on that side, you can get smushed flat, which is really bad. Or you see guys like Gordon Ryan using it to step over into weird back triangles and stuff. If you watch his match with Wagner Rocha, that's how he finishes him. Just encourages a bad entry to deep half and goes through, sits through and frees his legs. But Verdum used to, instead of trying to deal, instead of, the opponent would have the underhook, and instead of just having his elbow hanging out and stopping him from going underneath, he'd put his hand underneath the opponent's chin and just push it out straight. And with your hand straight underneath the opponent, your arm straight and your hand underneath the opponent's chin, they can't really do anything to that arm. It's a really cool position. Play around with it if you're a grappler. But it just reminded me of that a lot. Like, deep half guard is treated as this position where you have to get in there, you had to get your dominant grips, you had to do stuff that good guys aren't, or guys of your level and above aren't going to let you do. So having entries to deep half that don't rely on getting that dominant position first, where you can just sort of make the most of a bad position, really powerful. Sorry to casual listeners for getting in the weeds there, but we're going to do it again because Charles comes up in the back body lock. Islam turns to face him. Charles pushes him into the fence, and he starts doing the single underhook pin along the fence that is so famous from American Kickboxing Academy and Abdulmanap Nurmagomedov's team, now Habib's team. I don't know what they're called. Do they have a name? Something interesting came up, which I kind of expected, which was, if you remember when Habib Nurmagomedov was champion, and we were talking about this cage control and the single underhook pin and working for the body lock and stuff. I think even before the McGregor fight, or certainly before the Poirier fight, we were talking about how overhook work with your back to the cage is going to be a big part of working your way out there. And I specifically said, have a look at Islam Makhachev, because he's Habib's closest training partner, and he does this all the time when people try it on him. I imagine he has spent many a round, being the guy who's also in the same division as Habib, I imagine he spent many a round with his back to the fence trying to deal with Habib or dealing with him. And we've seen it from Islam, and I said, look, what's his name? Shavkat Rakhmonov. He did it in a couple of his fights too. You saw Paddy Pimblett do it the other day. It wasn't quite as, it was a beautiful throw, much prettier than Islam Makhachev's, but it wasn't sort of dealing with the same level of wrestling pressure. But when you have the overhook and you either step all the way through and do a what's it called? Haragoshi? No, Ogo. You either step all the way through and trip him over both legs, or you do an Uchimata on one leg, which is what Rakhmonov did against that lad he fought. What was his name? I'm not going to edit in later. But it's working with the overhook as the opponent is working their underhook, and you get your knees inside of theirs, and you step across and you try and do the judo throws over the top, or a whizzer kick, or whatever you want to call it. It's got a Sambo name, I'm sure. But it's a really important part of fighting with your back off the fence. And you saw it against from Islam Makhachev against Thiago Moises. And he did it against a couple of guys. But sometimes you hit the big throw and you end up on top, which is great. But a lot of the time you stumble the guy, he bellies out into like a sprawling position, and you either get the front headlock or you run out away from the fence. And that's what you wanted in the first place. Now, what I really liked about this was that Oliveira was using good upper body pressure. He dug his underhook really well. He got his upper body single underhook pin. And what you saw was Makhachev had the overhook and he's flat backed against the fence, and he just picks up his knee and he gives him a little knee in the belly. And Charles continues trying to work for a stronger position, and then Islam gives him another little knee in the belly. And the thing about that along the fence is that if you are with your feet underneath you pushed up against the fence, you are not going to deliver a stronger knee than the guy who's got his hips back and is leaning into you against the fence. You're not going to win a knee-for-knee contest. But he gets Charles to knee him back, and the moment Charles's leg is coming back to the floor, he hits the throw. It is really gorgeous. He locks him into this pattern that he understands, he knows, he's seen it tons of times before. He gives him a couple of little knees. Charles knees back, he hits the throw. If you take one thing away from this fight, it's that. 2 minutes 45 left in the first round. Go watch it. It's really gorgeous. Little knee, Charles continues fighting. Little knee, Charles knees back, gets thrown. And Charles ends up in bottom half guard again. This time his head's against the cage. He's trying to turn himself off, trying to avoid little elbows and punches at the same time. Far less free to move his upper body and his hips and stuff than he was before when he was out in the open. And the round ends, not an awful lot of damage done by Makhachev, but certainly not in the same danger that so many other Oliveira opponents are the moment they jump into his guard. He starts throwing things up, they freak out. Makhachev managed to pin him against the fence, basically, and put him on the defensive from his guard. Second round was really interesting because on the boycast I was talking about how Charles is good in long clinches when he's got a frame in front of the opponent. So if he's got one forearm across their neck, if he's got a double collar tie where he's holding the back of the head but with his elbows in front of their collarbones or forearms in front of their collarbones. Those sort of positions where there's a little bit of space, or his head posted on the opponent, where there's a little bit of space between them and he can hit them with knees and elbows. And Makhachev is very good in full, like, Greco chest-to-chest style over-under clinches. And I said, when these two come together, you're going to be looking for Charles to frame on him and hit him with elbows and things and disengage. And second round starts, they come together, Charles is framing on him, loads up a big elbow, Islam ducks it, and he's in full chest-to-chest. And I went, oh, that's not good. And he moved Oliveira to the fence, and respect to Charles Oliveira because he fought off the takedown attempts really well. Makhachev was doing the step to the middle and try and hip throw him sort of stuff, tried to mat return him, couldn't do it. And then Charles dug a forearm across his face, hit him with a good knee, and then swung an elbow at him, and Makhachev broke away back into the middle of the cage. So that was really impressive to stop Makhachev from taking him down on several attempts from the from that position that he does so well along the cage. And then Charles got excited, and that's when he just went full head hunting. No kicks to the body, no low kicks, no real cleverness, because he felt like he had a ticking clock on him. It's the thing of being taken down or the threat of being taken down. You're like, well, I better make it count when I'm throwing punches. So everything after that is just he's trying to take Makhachev's head off. There's no subtlety to it. Makhachev's keeping his distance well, dinging him with counter punches, even in the longer exchanges, which is where I thought Oliveira would have the advantage because of his wicked left hook. But Makhachev's right hook was actually giving him a lot more problems than Oliveira's left hook was giving Makhachev. And then he runs up into a flying knee and gets chinned in the air like Arlovsky, falls down. And it's like Conor Rebush was talking about on Heavy Hand last week, but because guys respect his guard, we don't know if he'd have been done a lot of these times, when he gets dropped. And Makhachev jumped right on him, ended up in half guard and had his head underneath Oliveira's armpit. So he's walking him up into an arm triangle, just had to get his legs free. And Oliveira made the decision that he was going to, the moment that Makhachev's legs popped free of his guard, he was going to turn to his belly as hard as he could, or up to his knees rather, because that you're giving your back, but you are taking away the arm triangle because you're not going to be arm triangled looking down at the floor while your opponent's behind you. But as he starts to turn, Makhachev gets free, and the top pressure from Makhachev was insane because Oliveira was halfway into the turn and he just dragged him back down. Oliveira tapped immediately because he knew that he was done. But yeah, really impressive submission. And honestly, quite impressive striking was what I took away from this. Really nice work with his back along the fence from Makhachev. I was quite pleased with Oliveira's wrestling in this one, both pursuing takedowns on Makhachev, or trying to, and his work defending from those clinches along the fence, because it's always been an interesting thing, because people have always said, like, oh, Charles was a grappler and he doesn't have to wrestle because he's learned how to box. And the thing is that he has been taking people down. He's been surprising people with takedowns, and he's got this thing where if he fails a takedown, he can just go to half guard and start trying to come up again. So ultimately, very interesting grappling match, cut short by Islam Makhachev being a filthy cheat and knocking his man out. No, I was super impressed. Obviously, very much the biggest win on Makhachev's record now. But it's kind of like Fedor Big Nog. Big Nog had this amazing record. Fedor hadn't really beaten anyone of note. But the moment Fedor beat him 3 times, that's like, or 2 times and 2.5 times. You get to steal that guy's prestige. You go like, well, all his wins are now my wins. So good for Makhachev. Nice to see Khabib happy for his mate, and nice to see Khabib talking to Oliveira. I thought that was, they do want to focus on like the winner after fights, but Khabib went straight over to Charles Oliveira, and I would have been really interested to see them talking, because they've been, they've had it like a friendly rivalry, but they've always been pretty chill about each other. I mean, it confirms what we knew about Islam Makhachev, that he's very, very good, but now he's also beaten some good people, or a good person, so that's quite exciting. The sad part is that Volkanovski is now lined up for a title fight, which is good because there's not a lot going on at featherweight, and I'm all up for, one of the pound-for-pound best fighters in the world testing himself. It's kind of shit because Beneil Dariush was basically he was level with Islam Makhachev for this title fight. They were going to fight each other for this title fight, for a number 1 contender slot. And now he's beaten another really good guy on this card, and he ends up in a worse position because of it. It's really sad. But anyway, we'll talk about that fight now. We'll just scan over it because, basically, Beneil Dariush is really hard to take down. It's really interesting because Beneil Dariush came onto my radar because I knew him from the grappling world. I'd seen him compete in the gi a couple of times. And Trumpet Dan Lukart, he had a video with Beneil showing the collar and sleeve guard. And this was before there was a lot of good content out on the collar and sleeve guard. And Beneil, I think he was a brown belt at the time, or maybe he was a black belt at the time. But so I was like, oh, interesting. Yeah, Beneil, I wonder how he'll do in MMA. And then he learned a really nice left kick, really nice left overhand, left straight, good jab, very game, just went after it. And then he'd picked up wrestling really well. And that's the thing that's really surprised me, because Ferreira couldn't do anything to get him off his feet. Like, that was the difference between the two of them. When they were scrambling on the ground, it was good, even stuff. But whenever Ferreira wanted to try and take him down, or if Ferreira wrestled up into a single leg position, Beneil was like, no, sorry, not getting it from here. And it is a huge deal. Like, so much of the grappling game generally, even coming up off the floor, if you want to sweep someone, most of that is wrestling up now. You've got to come up into an advantageous wrestling position and finish the takedown. Now, Gamrot is a good wrestler. He's a scrambly wrestler. He does a lot of low entries and then chains takedowns very well off that. He doesn't try and like brute force things too much. He just, keeps going from one thing to another. And Beneil's still very, very difficult to get off his feet. Almost impossible. It was kind of, Gamrot did get Sarukian off his feet many times. Well, they ended up on the mat many times, But some of the stuff that came out in the Sarukian fight, and also the Kutateladze fight, when Gamrot can't get a takedown, he's got serviceable striking in that he throws good 1-2s off both stances, but that is the extent of what he'll do. Doesn't use combinations. He'll throw the odd kick, but he doesn't set up his low kicks. He doesn't look for them very much. He doesn't use them to build a game. He doesn't, even if you're just throwing 1-2s and then the odd low kick and you're doing that consistently, you're building up damage on the legs and you're making your job easier. Or you're at least establishing another threat, and then you can turn that into, God knows, a Superman punch if you're old school, but it sets up other stuff. It allows you to use feints and capitalize on them. But Gamrot is very, I think he thinks that because he switches stances, he's tricky, but actually he's very predictable because he doesn't really do anything else except for 1-2s from those two stances. with no feints, no real like jabbing or double jabbing to set up a good left straight or a right straight from either stance. It's just 1-2s. It's not using the jab to establishing a jab and building off it. Meanwhile, Beneil Dariush is actually dangerous on the feet. It's not the most technical depth, but he's got a good eye for an opening. He counters well. He's constantly pounding the right side of his opponent's body with his left kick. And I was saying, I thought that it was going to get really messy for Gamrot, because what would happen was, when he comes out of an exchange, even though he tries to fight out of both stances, he naturally resets to orthodox. That's his natural stance. So, if you were pulling around each other, or you're coming out of a clinch, or someone misses an elbow off a collar tie and you come back out, at that moment he'll be in an orthodox stance. And I thought throwing kicks on the end of exchanges was going to really, or Beneil Dariush throwing liver kicks on the end of exchanges was going to start to catch up to him. Caught him with a couple, but it didn't become as big a issue as I thought it would. Great left hand dropped Gamrot near the end of the third round, pretty much sealed it. But yeah, he was trying to take down a brick wall for most of the fight. There was some good scrambling in the first round, actually. Gamrot, he's one of the guys using the Victor roll. It's basically him and Gary Tonon. And to differentiate that from like a Tony Ferguson Dark Souls roll, a Granby, that sort of thing, both of which we'll touch on in the Makhachev fight, a Victor roll is where you bend forward and you open your legs wide and roll through, because you have your legs wide so that you can catch a leg, like a knee bar attempt, or just, entangle a leg on the way over. And he did that about a dozen times against Sarukian. And what happens is that guys, because they don't want you to get their leg, they'll sprawl back and you'll just sort of like roll out in front of them. Or you can build up and start scrambling, which is what happened a lot of times in the Sarukian fight. And happened once in this fight. But yeah, the Victor rolls are gorgeous. Huge fan of them. And because everyone's really hot on Sambo right now, Victor roll, named after a guy named Victor. Don't know who he is, but he was a Sambista. Sambistador. Sambo-ka. But Volk Han was one of the very early Sambo guys to compete in MMA and pro wrestling. And he taught a lot of the guys who taught a lot of the guys now. But he used to love rolling on knee bar entries with the Victor roll. And like I said, you can see Gary Tonon doing it in MMA. In fact, Gamrot grappled Gary Tonon at ADCC in 2019, and Gary Tonon tried to Victor roll him. And it was a really interesting double attack, because he'd get the overhook, or give Gamrot the underhook and go for the overhook, and he'd try and Victor roll, and Gamrot would pull the leg back so that he couldn't reach through his own legs and grab and roll, and that allowed Gary Tonon to step through and trip him on the other side with the wizard kick, whatever you want to call it. Anyway, that was a fun fight. I thought, Beneil Dariush deserves a title fight now. I mean, he was... I think they should have... I really wanted to see him versus Islam for the title fight, but now he's going to have to wait like an additional 6 months, maybe a year. You never know. I mean, Islam Makhachev did the thing that... Lots of people complained like, oh, we're back to one title fight a year for lightweight now, but Islam Makhachev immediately said he was going to be a fighting champion, and people on Twitter were going, well, he just said he wants to be a fighting champion. Just to be clear, everyone says they're going to be a fighting champion when they win a belt. Conor McGregor said he was going to defend his belt like 100 times. You gotta give him a chance, but you don't have to believe what they say. Oh, side note, someone said that Khabib paid $1 million for Islam's camp. I think it was DC said that. DC, not good with money, because he's always talking about fighter pay. He thought, because I put up a picture with a yellow number on, he thought that Paddy Pimblett made $700,000 for his last fight. Paddy Pimblett did not make $700,000. Paddy Pimblett is on a 20-20 contract, as far as I know. But yeah, imagine if you paid $1 million for a camp, and then the prize money from that camp was like less than a fifth of that. Because I imagine that the total for both these guys in terms of purse, I don't know about pay-per-view points, but Oliveira and Makhachev, their total purse is going to be less than $300,000, I'd imagine. The UFC got a steal, or consistently gets a steal for these events out of fighters. Right, should we do some of these dog shit fights, and then we'll come back to Jan O'Malley? Oh, Aljo versus TJ, that was rough. TJ Dillashaw immediately throws a kick and gets taken down, and I tweeted, that was easy. That's surprisingly easy. You saw him grimace on the way down, and I assumed he'd fucked his knee. Turns out, his shoulder popped out. Goes back to the corner between rounds, pops it back in. Comes out for the second round, pops out again. Aljo takes quite a while finishing a one-armed man while on top of him the entire time through 2 rounds. Just, good for Aljo getting his win. I'll try and give him credit. It wasn't super impressive given the circumstances, But the main thing is that it's insane that the ref allegedly Goddard knew, or TJ Dillashaw had brought it up in the fighter meetings, that he had dislocated his shoulder in August and popped it out 20 times since then or something like that. It's insane that saying, oh, well, I know how to pop it back in is enough. That should not get you medically cleared to fight. On the plus side, Dwayne Ludwig was sort of massaging his shoulder to try and get it to pop back in, which was a bit more encouraging than watching Brandon Gibson yank that dude, or who was it? Pico. Yanked Pico's arm around, and then the doctor come in and going, oh no, I actually think you've got a broken collarbone. All that yanking on it probably didn't help. It's just kind of shit. And then TJ Dillashaw got on the mic and was like, oh, I'm sorry for holding up the division. I knew that my arm was fucked, 2 months before this fight or whatever. But I needed my money, which is the kind of, that's the fight game. Hard to get mad at him when Conor McGregor and Kamaru Usman is still trying to work a con. He doesn't think he stands a chance against Canelo. He would not stand a chance against Canelo. But if he got the fight, he'd take it and tell everyone that he was going to have a chance against Canelo. He'd get murked like he planned to, and he'd get the money. We're all working a grift in this sport. You just want the payday, and you have to be pretty good to get there. But once you get the payday, you're all right. What else was shit? Fiorot versus Chukagian, really, really bad. Two girls ki-eyeing at each other. And it really does work, because I was getting really weary watching this, and I stopped registering what was landing and what was missing. And I'm normally pretty good at watching a fight and seeing what's legit and what's not, even through the commentary going, oh, he's hurt and stuff like that. But just the constant ki-eyeing, it really does numb you. Shite fight was expected to be shite, though. Kaya Baralia versus Mahmoud Muradov was also shite, but sad because I love Kaya Baralia. Lovely butterfly sweep from the bottom in the second round. Really good guillotine turnovers. If you have that guillotine and you have one shin across the opponent's belly, you can crunch him down and turn him over, which was something that Luke Rockhold was really good at. Baralia would hit a couple of those in this fight. The main thing about that fight was the really gobby ref, who was like, keep your fingers out the eyes, you slag. All the way through, hundreds of warnings, never did anything. He was all bark, no bite. It just pisses me off, because if you've warned the guy 8 times and he's still doing it, he's ignoring you. Take a point. Or shut up. If he's not actually doing anything illegal, shut up. Reminds me of a classic Chris Toyoni moment when a fighter was like bent double crying because they'd had their eye gouged for the second time. And Chris Toyoni's like, I've given him a very hard warning. So yeah, Kaya Baralia, second boring one in the row. Very unfortunate, because I like him. Nikita Krylov and Volkan Ozdemir had a banger first 3 minutes, and then it got a lot slower and a lot more boring. Nurmagomedov and Omagadzhiev was weird, because Omagadzhiev hit a beautiful takedown in the first round, and then jumped on a guillotine and gave up the round, and then just fell off a cliff for the rest of the fight. Arman Petrosian versus AJ Dobson was the most basic kickboxing match you'll ever see. In terms of, it was just two guys doing fundamentals at each other without really registering what the other one was doing. It's like, I'm throwing my 1-2 low kick 2, and then I'm going to pull my head back and you're going to do your thing. It really was tit for tat. And the thing is, the way to stop tit for tat is to either throw a combination and then press in and throw another combination, or throw a combination and then look at what the opponent's doing and counter, or break them off midway through, just intercept them. But both guys would throw a combination and then wait for the other guy to throw back and not do anything about it, but just sort of defend. It was like Dutch drilling the fight. Makhachev versus Gordon was really funny, because I got so many angry Makhachev fans in my comments last time when I said, I'd be really impressed if he'd done any damage. The last one was against Charles Johnson, who did a really good job of getting back up. So really all Makhachev did was mat returns and then didn't control from the top, and Johnson would jump back up. So if it's only mat returns which are immediately countered by stand-ups and no damage scored, how do you judge that? I mean, obviously everyone goes, oh, you got to judge. But if damage is the most important thing, and if takedowns that don't work don't count, so how do you judge that? And then he came into this fight, takedowns all day. Gordon just chilled in closed guard for most of the fight, but never attempted a strike. He'd get to half guard, wouldn't attempt a strike. He's kneeling over him with an underhook and his elbow cocked and ready to throw down on the guy's head, and he just didn't do it the whole fight. Fucking maddening. And then at the end of the fight, he did manage to pick up the armbar in the third because he was just grappling all over Gordon, and Gordon had a big go at it in the third and gassed himself out. But he comes on the mic afterwards and he's like, he's 10 years older than me. And you're like, that's not an advantage in sports. Like, what are you talking about? And then he goes, oh, he's a black belt. And you're like, there's a lot of black belts in the world, This guy, if you have really good wrestling and you can keep taking the guy down, you're probably more of a black belt in grappling than the guy who's a black belt in grappling. But the crazy thing was that Malcolm Gordon's moments in this one didn't really come from things he was doing, but mistakes that Makhachev made. So in the third round was the one that he really got going in and threatened from the back and stuff. Malcolm Gordon starts standing up along the cage without the underhook, which is a recipe for disaster or getting mat returned most of the time. Makhachev starts trying to tilt him back down to the floor, slips and gives him the underhook by accident, and then Gordon just runs around onto his back or bundles him over. Very weird fight. Makhachev's fights are weird. Makhachev's fan base is really weird. They get very, very angry for just like, I would love it if he did some damage. Because he had all that time on top from round 1 and round 2. If he'd been hitting the guy the whole time, I think Malcolm Gordon would have been in worse for wear when he tried to get on his back later. Super weird. It's interesting to watch him take people down, but it's a fight. Do some damage. Carol Rosa versus Lena Landsberg was shite as expected. And Bilal Muhammad and Sean Brady just traded 1-2s. I think I said that earlier, but Sean O'Malley versus Pio Dian, the other good fight. I was saying in the boycast that there are things I could see O'Malley giving trouble to Pio Dian with, particularly on the outside. My expectation, this is the thing, I joked about it on Twitter, but Pio Dian fans love insisting that he's going to murder whoever he fights and then arguing about the finer details of the judging on one round when it goes to decision. But a lot of people expected an outright murder, and Sean O'Malley gave an amazing account of himself. The thing that surprised me, I thought O'Malley would do well out in the open. The thing that surprised me was that Yan did wrestle, and O'Malley did pretty well there. And also O'Malley's chin, because he hasn't been hit clean an awful lot. And Yan was cracking him, and he was just no-selling it. Very impressive. Lots of cool little movements. The Sean O'Malley long right straight step through long left straight. That hurt Yan in the second round. Yan recovered by splaying his fingers and driving them directly at Sean O'Malley's eyes as he came in. Just veteran of the game move there. Love it. Quite interesting because Yan, he does this thing. We talked about it in... when did we talk about it? Probably the Filthy Casual's Guide to Pio Dian. He does this thing that reminds me of Igor Vovchanchin, but he'll like lean away and step off and throw a big swinging left with his head way out. And it made it look like he was really hurt here, but it's always been a way that he sort of leaves clinches and close-in exchanges and tries to chin the guy on the way out. He hit O'Malley clean with a couple of those at one point. But it was really interesting because I saw O'Malley move back to the fence from the very get-go, and I thought, we were saying in the pre-fight, he hasn't dealt with a lot of good ring cutters. He's sort of been in control of where the fight takes place. And Pio Dian will, while he does take the first round real slow a lot of the time, he will get in your face and close you down and put you towards the fence, and that in itself is tiring. Just the pressure you're under from being at close quarters when you're normally free to float around the ring. Or O'Malley likes to push people back to the fence himself. So yeah, I was watching him do that, and Yan was stepping up into body kicks and things, and I was going, oh, this isn't looking good for O'Malley, and then he did fine. He just fought off there. And then when Yan entered clinches or hit takedowns, O'Malley was pretty good at scrambling around and getting back up. Got stuck on the bottom in the third round for a good part of it. But yeah, I mean, everyone's been losing their mind about how Yan should have won on the cards, but it's a big step back from, he kills him any way he wants, kills him anywhere, to, but he had top control for 2.5 minutes in the third round, So just remember that. No, what I'm saying is I was impressed by O'Malley. He's had this really slow come up, and they've been trying to feed him scrubs, and this was a massive step up for no reason, it seemed. And now I'm just like, yeah, give him good guys. Why were we taking so long? Let's just do it. So that was the card that was. We got a really fun weekend coming up. We've got a fun weekend coming up next weekend, hopefully, because this card was largely shite. But we have Mansour Barnoui making his Bellator debut, and we'll find out why he's taken 3 years. Was he just spending? Has he just spent the $1 million he won in the road tournament and now needs money? Has he spent the last 3 years being drunk? We'll find out. But he's in an interesting position because he has the rivalry with Islam Makhachev built in. We've got Calvin Kattar versus Arnold Allen, which will be a banger, I hope, and some other stuff to talk about. So yeah, if you want to get in on the extra episodes of the podcast, get the previews for big fights like that so you'll know if I was right or wrong, and get the articles like the upcoming Advanced Striking 2.0 Israel Adesanya and the previous Advanced Striking 2.0 Alex Pereira. Sign up to the Patreon, support the podcast, be a boy. If you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com, and if you want to see what I'm writing anytime, fightprimer.com. I am your boy, Jack Slack. Bringing back Khabib to stand next to whoever we want people to like from now on, bless.